It started with the sound of laughter from the living room while I arranged the silver around our Thanksgiving table. I glanced up to see my father recording me with his phone. Hours later, the Facebook notification showed his post. "Look at this failure. She was always a servant." My siblings had already left laughing emoji comments. When I confronted them, they called me oversensitive. I grabbed my purse and left. The next morning, my sister texted, "Why can't I withdraw $3,000 from your account?" That was when I finally exploded. I had always been the responsible one in my family. While my 3 siblings were encouraged to follow their dreams and live their best lives, I was the one expected to be practical, dependable, and most importantly, available whenever anyone needed anything. That was my role as Miranda, the eldest daughter of the Walker family. My father, Brian, was a charming man to everyone outside our home. His friends thought he hung the moon. His co-workers described him as generous and fair. But inside our 4 walls, he was calculating and manipulative, constantly pitting us against each other in subtle competitions for his fleeting approval. My mother had passed away when I was 16, leaving me to step into her role far too young. My siblings Amanda, Trent, and Paige were 13, 11, and 7 at the time. While my father technically raised us, I was the one who made lunches, helped with homework, and made sure everyone had clean clothes for school. Despite all this, I managed to put myself through college, earning a degree in finance. Now, at 32, I worked as a financial analyst at a respected firm in Boston. I had my own apartment, a decent savings account, and a life I had built entirely on my own. My family hadn't contributed a dime to my education or career, yet they acted entitled to the fruits of my labor. About 3 years ago, during a particularly difficult winter, when Amanda claimed her heating was about to be shut off, I had added my siblings as authorized users on my emergency savings account. It was meant to be a temporary solution for genuine crises, with clear agreements about communication before any withdrawals. They had each used it once or twice for legitimate emergencies, always with prior discussion. The Thanksgiving disaster had started innocently enough. I had volunteered to host at my apartment, thinking it might finally be a chance to show my family that I was more than just their backup plan. I spent weeks planning the menu, decorating my apartment, and making sure everything would be perfect. When they arrived, my father immediately criticized the size of my place. Amanda commented that my furniture looked budget. Trent complained about the neighborhood. And Paige, who at 23 still lived at home with our father, simply followed his lead in making subtly cutting remarks. Still, I persisted. I served drinks, prepared appetizers, and began setting the table with the nice dinnerware and silverware I had splurged on specifically for this occasion. That was when I heard the laughter and looked up to see my father filming me. After discovering the Facebook post during dinner, I confronted them all. "Why would you post that?" I asked my father, showing him my phone with his post clearly displayed. "It was just a joke, Miranda," he said, not even looking up from his plate of turkey and stuffing. "You always take everything so seriously." "Yeah, lighten up," Amanda added. "Everyone knows you like playing hostess." "Playing hostess?" "I cooked for 3 days straight while working full time. And there she goes, making herself the victim again," Trent chimed in, rolling his eyes dramatically. I felt my chest tighten as they all exchanged knowing looks. This was their usual tactic: unite against Miranda, make her feel crazy for having normal human reactions. "The post has 73 likes already," my father said, looking pleased with himself. "People think it's hilarious." That was when I stood up, grabbed my purse, and left my own apartment. I didn't care about abandoning them with the mess. I didn't care about the leftover food. I just needed to get away from their suffocating presence. I checked into a hotel for the night, something I had never allowed myself to do because it seemed wasteful. But that night, I needed the anonymity, the clean sheets, the distance from my life. The next morning, Still in my hotel room, I received the text from Amanda. Why can't I withdraw $3,000 from your account? No preamble, no explanation, not even a good morning or sorry about yesterday, just entitlement. I called my bank immediately and was shocked to discover this wasn't Amanda's first attempt to withdraw money without asking. The bank representative patiently walked me through a series of transactions over the past 2 years, small withdrawals between $100 and $500, scattered strategically between legitimate transactions. Would you like to see the total amount withdrawn by authorized users in the past 24 months? The representative asked. Yes, please, I replied, my stomach already nodding with dread. The total is $22,643. I nearly dropped the phone. That was more than half of what I had managed to save since starting my career. Money that was supposed to be my safety net, my future home down payment, my protection against emergencies. I spent the next hour going through every transaction, methodically documenting dates, amounts, and which sibling had made each withdrawal. The pattern was clear. They had been systematically draining my account, likely assuming I wouldn't notice the smaller amounts amidst my regular transactions. Before confronting them, I needed evidence. I printed statements, highlighted unauthorized withdrawals, and created a spreadsheet showing exactly how much each sibling had taken. Amanda led the pack with nearly $10,000, followed by Trent with $7,000, and Paige with just over $5,000. As I stared at the numbers, memories flooded back. Amanda's new car last year that she claimed was such a good deal. Trent's mysterious ability to afford season tickets to the Patriots despite his job at the local gym. Paige's extensive shoe collection despite working part-time at a coffee shop. All of it had been funded by me, without my knowledge or consent. With trembling hands, I closed my laptop. The betrayal cut deep, but the truth was now undeniable. My family hadn't just embarrassed me at Thanksgiving, they had been stealing from me for years. I decided to call Amanda first, my finger hovering over her contact information for several minutes before I worked up the courage to press call. Hey sis, about that money, she answered, casual as could be. No, I interrupted, my voice steadier than I expected. There will be no $3,000. In fact, we need to talk about the $10,236 you've already taken without my permission. Silence on the line. Then, what are you talking about? I only used the emergency account when I absolutely needed to. I have bank statements, Amanda. Dates, times, amounts. Do you want me to start listing them? Her tone shifted instantly from confusion to defensiveness. That money was for family emergencies. What emergency required $500 on the exact date of the Coachella ticket release, or $300 the day after you posted photos of your new designer bag? You're being ridiculous, she snapped. That account is for family. Are you saying we're not family now? Family doesn't steal from each other. It's not stealing if you gave us access. God, you're so controlling with money. Just because you choose to live like a miser doesn't mean the rest of us should suffer. Return the money, Amanda. All of it. I want a payment plan in writing by the end of the week. She laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. Good luck with that. Wait until Dad hears about this. Before I could respond, she hung up. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with texts from my entire family in a group chat I hadn't even known existed. Dad, Miranda's on some power trip about the emergency account. Typical. Trent. She can't just change the rules whenever she wants. Paige. Is she really this selfish? After everything we've done for her? Amanda. She's threatening me over money she said we could use. Their messages continued, each one twisting the narrative further from reality. According to them, I was the villain, ungrateful, selfish, controlling. They painted themselves as victims of my supposed financial tyranny, conveniently forgetting that it was my money they had been taking. I typed and deleted multiple responses, finally settling on. This isn't about changing rules. This is about the $22,000 taken without my knowledge or permission. I expect repayment plans from each of you." The response was immediate and unified. "Dad, there she goes with the guilt trips again." Trent, "Always the martyr." "Amanda, you gave us access. That means you gave us the money." "Paige, I can't believe you're counting dollars and cents against your own family." I put my phone down, feeling physically ill. This was gaslighting at its finest, making me question whether I was overreacting, whether I was the one in the wrong for expecting basic respect for my boundaries and property. The next day, my father called. I almost didn't answer, but some lingering sense of obligation made me pick up. "We need to talk about this tantrum you're throwing," he said without preamble. "It's not a tantrum to expect people to not steal from me." "Nobody stole anything," he said, his voice taking on the condescending tone he always used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "You're blowing this whole thing out of proportion because you're upset about the video, which, by the way, was just a joke." "This has nothing to do with the video," I insisted, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. The video had been the tipping point, but the financial betrayal was very real. "Look, I think you need to take some time to cool off," he continued. "But I should warn you, if you keep making these accusations and demands, I won't have any choice but to let people know the real story about you." My blood ran cold. What real story? About your episodes, how you've always been unstable with money, how you make promises and then get paranoid and defensive. Do you really want your work colleagues hearing about that? Or that nice boyfriend of yours? Jake, isn't it? I felt like I'd been slapped. My father was threatening to spread lies about my mental health to my workplace and my relationship. And the mention of Jake, whom I'd only been dating for 4 months and had only mentioned twice in family gatherings, felt particularly invasive. "That would be defamation," I managed to say. He laughed. "It's not defamation when it's family concern. Besides, we have documentation." "Documentation of what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "The loan agreements, the texts where you offered financial help, the family therapy sessions where you admitted to using money to control people." None of that had ever happened. We had never attended family therapy. I had never signed loan agreements with my siblings. This was fabrication on a level I hadn't thought even my father capable of. "You're making that up," I said, my voice barely audible. "Check your email," he replied and hung up. With shaking hands, I opened my email to find a message from my father with attachments. The first was a scanned document that appeared to be a loan agreement between Amanda and me, with a signature that vaguely resembled mine but was clearly forged. The second was a doctored screenshot of text messages showing me supposedly offering money with no need to pay back. The third was a photo of me sleeping on my couch, clearly taken without my knowledge during a family visit, with my laptop open beside me. The implications were clear. They had not only been stealing my money but had also been planning this defense for some time. They had been in my home, looking through my personal belongings, possibly accessing my computer and documenting things they could use against me. I felt violated on a level I had never experienced before. This wasn't just financial abuse, it was a coordinated effort to exploit me and then discredit me if I ever fought back. I called my bank immediately and removed all 3 siblings as authorized users on my account. Then I froze the account entirely, planning to open a new one at a different bank the next day. When I checked social media that evening, I discovered I had been blocked by all 4 family members. Yet somehow, mutual friends were reaching out asking if I was okay and saying they were there for me if I needed to talk. It didn't take long to discover why my father had made a vague but concerning post about being worried about Miranda's state of mind and asking people to keep an eye on her. I logged out of all social media, feeling both angry and deeply alone. My family hadn't just stolen my money. They were now actively trying to destroy my reputation and isolate me from my support system. As I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by the remnants of the Thanksgiving dinner they had ruined, I realized this wasn't going to be resolved with a simple conversation or even formal repayment plans. This was war one they had been waging against me for years without my knowledge, and one I was only now beginning to understand how to fight. The next morning, I went straight to my bank when they opened at 9 o'clock. I explained the situation to a personal banker named Grace, who listened with increasing concern as I detailed the unauthorized withdrawals and the subsequent threats from my family. "Unfortunately, this isn't as uncommon as you might think," Grace said, her expression sympathetic. "Family financial abuse is something we see regularly." She helped me close my compromised account entirely and open 2 new ones at the same bank, a checking account for daily expenses and a savings account with no authorized users and additional security measures. I also opened a safety deposit box where I could store important documents that I didn't want my family to access. "You should also consider changing all your passwords," Grace advised. "Email, social media, other financial accounts, anything your family might know or be able to guess." I spent the next 2 hours changing every password I could think of, setting up 2-factor authentication on all accounts, and creating new security questions with answers my family wouldn't know. I also blocked all their phone numbers, though I kept their emails unblocked, so I would have a record of any further threats or manipulations. After securing my accounts, I needed to address the social media situation. Rather than engaging directly with my father's vague posts about my mental health, I made a simple, factual statement, taking a break from social media for a while to focus on personal matters. "If you need to reach me, please email." Then I deactivated my accounts. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Miranda? It's Trent." Of all my siblings, Trent and I had once been the closest. Before our mother died, we used to build elaborate Lego structures together and make up stories about the people who lived in them. That connection had faded as he aligned himself more and more with our father, but some small part of me still hoped he might be different. "I'm not interested in more gaslighting," I said flatly. "No, listen, I get why you're upset," he said, his voice lower than usual. Things got out of hand. $22,000 isn't out of hand, Trent. It's theft. I know. Look, can we meet? Just you and me. I want to talk about making this right." Against every instinct screaming that this was a trap, I agreed to meet Trent at a coffee shop downtown, a public place where he couldn't make a scene without consequences. When I arrived, Trent was already seated in a corner booth, 2 coffees on the table. He looked tired, the usual cocky expression replaced by something that almost resembled remorse. "I ordered your usual," he said, pushing a vanilla latte toward me. I sat down but didn't touch the coffee. "Talk. First, I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. The video, all of it. Dad went too far." I waited, not willing to accept such a limited apology. "And yes, I took money without asking. We all did. It was wrong." "So you'll pay it back?" He sighed, rubbing his face. "That's what I wanted to talk about. I don't have $7,000, Miranda. Not all at once. I'm not asking for all at once. I want a payment plan." He seemed to relax slightly. "I could do maybe $200 a month?" I did the mental math. At $200 a month, it would take him nearly 3 years to repay what he owed me. But it was a start. "300, I countered, "and I want it in writing." "Fine," he agreed, surprising me with his lack of resistance. "I'll draw something up." We spent the next hour negotiating terms. Monthly payments of $300, beginning the following week, continuing until his debt was fully paid. He even suggested adding an interest rate of 2%, which I hadn't expected. "I'll talk to Amanda and Paige too," he promised as we were finishing up. "Get them on board with similar arrangements." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this could be resolved, without completely destroying what remained of our family. "Thank you," I said, finally taking a sip of the now cold latte. "This means a lot to me, Trent." "We're still family," he said with a small smile, "no matter what." I wanted to believe him. I really did. That evening, Trent sent over a signed repayment agreement, complete with the terms we had discussed. It wasn't legally binding, but it was a gesture of good faith that I hadn't expected. He also included a text saying he'd spoken to Amanda and Paige, and they were thinking about similar arrangements. Progress, I thought. Slow, but real progress. The next day, I was grocery shopping when my credit card was declined. Embarrassed, I tried my debit card, which thankfully worked. As soon as I got to my car, I called my credit card company. "Miss Walker, there appears to be a security hold on your account due to unusual activity," the representative explained. "We've detected 6 credit applications submitted under your name in the past 48 hours. My stomach dropped. I haven't applied for any new credit. That's why we placed the security hold. The applications were for store credit cards, personal loans, and 2 new major credit cards. They all used your social security number and personal information, but were submitted from IP addresses in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, where my father lived. This is identity theft," I said, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. "I need to lock down my credit immediately." The representative guided me through placing a credit freeze with all 3 major credit bureaus and filing an initial fraud alert. They also provided me with case numbers and advised me to file a police report as soon as possible. When I got home, I pulled my full credit reports from all 3 bureaus. What I discovered was far worse than I had anticipated. This wasn't a recent development. There were accounts opened in my name going back at least 18 months. Store credit cards, personal loans, even a car loan for a vehicle I had never seen. All told, there was over $50,000 of debt in my name that I hadn't created. Some of the accounts were in good standing, with minimum payments being made just enough to keep them from going to collections. Others were already 30 or 60 days delinquent. The methodical approach suggested this wasn't a spontaneous reaction to our recent conflict. This was a long-term plan. My father had been systematically using my identity to secure credit, likely intending to bleed each account dry and move on to the next before I discovered what was happening. I spent the rest of the day on the phone filing a formal identity theft report with the FTC, speaking with fraud departments at various creditors, and finally, making a police report. The officer who took my statement was professional but not particularly hopeful. "Family identity theft cases are complicated," he explained. "They often come down to he said, she said situations, especially if the family member had access to your personal information with your knowledge." "I never gave them permission to open credit in my name," I insisted. "I understand, ma'am. We'll investigate, but I want to set realistic expectations. These cases can take months to resolve, and prosecution is challenging without clear evidence of intent." That evening, I received an email from Trent. The subject line read simply, "Thought you should see this." The email contained a forwarded message from my father to my siblings. "Miranda is making serious accusations that could have legal consequences for all of us. Remember our discussion about financial support and stick to that story. All loan documentation is in place. Whatever you do, do not admit to anything in writing or over text. Family meeting at my house tomorrow night to get our stories straight. Do not tell Miranda." Any hope I had harbored that Trent might be an ally crumbled. The coffee shop meeting, the seemingly sincere apology, the repayment agreement, all of it had been a strategy to buy time while they coordinated their defense against me. I was truly on my own. By the end of the week, the full impact of the identity theft began to materialize. My credit score had plummeted from 780 to 460. The carefully built financial reputation I had worked for years to establish was in ruins. At work, I tried to maintain normalcy, focusing on the year-end reports that needed my attention. But concentration was impossible. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart raced, expecting more bad news. On Friday afternoon, my supervisor Patricia called me into her office. She was a straightforward woman in her 50s who had always given me fair evaluations and challenging projects. "Miranda, is everything all right?" she asked, as soon as I closed the door. "Yes, just a bit stressed with the holiday season," I lied. The reason I ask is that we're finalizing the team for the Westfield account, she said, referring to a major client I had been positioned to lead. It requires security clearance and a comprehensive background check, including financial history. My stomach dropped. I see. Given your usual excellent work, I assumed you'd be perfect for it. But HR flagged some concerns with your current financial situation. Of course, the credit checks would show the recent inquiries, the fraudulent accounts, the dropping score. I'm dealing with an identity theft situation, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. Family related. I've filed all the appropriate reports and am working with the credit bureaus to resolve it. Patricia's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry to hear that. Unfortunately, the Westfield timeline doesn't allow us to wait for resolution. I've had to assign Taylor as lead instead. Taylor, my peer who had started 6 months after me and had less experience with financial analysis. It was a professional setback I couldn't afford, especially given my personal financial crisis. I understand, I said, though I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. Once your situation is resolved, we'll reconsider you for similar opportunities, Patricia added, but we both knew the damage was done. In our industry, reputation was everything, and rumors spread quickly. The professional disappointment was just the beginning. That weekend, I received a letter from my apartment management company informing me that my lease renewal application had been declined due to failure to meet current credit requirements. My lease was up in 45 days, which meant I had just over a month to find new housing in Boston's competitive rental market with a destroyed credit score. I spent Sunday apartment hunting, only to be rejected by 3 different landlords as soon as they ran my credit. The fourth, a rundown building in a neighborhood I had specifically avoided due to its higher crime rate, agreed to rent to me only with an additional $2,000 security deposit and first and last month's rent up front. With no other options and time running out, I signed the lease, draining my remaining savings to cover the increased housing costs. The apartment was smaller, with plumbing issues and unreliable heat, but it was all I could secure. As I packed my belongings, carefully wrapping the dinnerware that had been used for that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, the reality of how thoroughly my life had been upended truly hit me. In just 2 weeks, I had lost my financial stability, my professional opportunity, and now my home. The careful, responsible life I had built was collapsing around me. The stress began to manifest physically. I developed insomnia, lying awake at night running calculations in my head, trying to figure out how to pay off fraudulent debts while covering my increased living expenses. I lost weight as my appetite disappeared. My hair started falling out in clumps, clogging the shower drain every morning. During a particularly bad night when I couldn't stop my mind from racing, I searched online for family identity theft support and found a therapist who specialized in cases like mine. Dr. Lauren Cooper had 20 years of experience counseling victims of familial financial abuse. At our first session, I broke down completely, sobbing as I detailed the betrayals, large and small, that had led me to her office. What you're experiencing is financial trauma, Dr. Cooper explained, and it's compounded by the fact that the perpetrators are people who were supposed to love and protect you. I keep wondering what I did wrong, I admitted. If I had been more careful or less trusting. This is not your fault, she said firmly. Your family made calculated decisions to exploit you. That's on them, not you. Over the following weeks, our sessions became a lifeline. Dr. Cooper helped me understand the dynamics that had made me vulnerable to this type of abuse and gave me practical tools for setting boundaries and rebuilding my sense of self-worth. During this time, the one bright spot in my life was Jake, the man I had been dating for nearly 5 months. He had been supportive when I explained my housing situation, even helping me move into the new apartment. "You'll get through this," he assured me, hanging curtains in my new living room. "You're the strongest person I know." His confidence in me was touching, especially when I felt anything but strong. That evening, as we sat on my couch, eating takeout, because my kitchen was still in boxes, I decided to fully confide in him about the identity theft situation. It's not just regular identity theft, I explained. It's my father. He's been opening accounts in my name for at least a year and a half. Jake's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Your father? Are you sure? The police traced the applications to IP addresses in his area, and the timing correlates with his financial issues last year. Plus, he's the only one who would have access to all my personal information. That's really serious, Jake said, putting down his fork. Are you pressing charges? I've filed reports, but family cases are complicated. The officer I spoke with wasn't optimistic about prosecution. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Do you think that's wise? Going after your own father legally? The question caught me off guard. He stole my identity and racked up $50,000 of fraudulent debt. What choice do I have? I just mean, family is family, you know? Maybe there's a way to work this out without getting the law involved. A small alarm bell rang in the back of my mind. This was the same language my family had used to manipulate me for years. Family is family as a justification for exploitation. There's no working it out with someone who commits fraud, I said carefully. Sure, but is it worth destroying your relationship with your entire family? Over money? It's not just about money, Jake. It's about years of manipulation and abuse. He sighed, a sound that suggested I was being difficult. I get that you're upset. I just think going nuclear might be something you regret later. Over the next few days, Jake's questions became more specific, more probing. He wanted to know if I had spoken with an attorney yet, whether I had signed any affidavits, what evidence I had submitted to the police. Each question seemed innocent enough on its own, but collectively they formed a pattern that made me increasingly uneasy. My suspicions grew when Jake left his phone unattended during a shower at my apartment. I had never been the type to snoop, but something about his recent behavior had set off warning bells I couldn't ignore. His phone was unlocked. I opened his recent calls and felt my blood turn to ice. Multiple calls to and from a number I recognized instantly my father's. With trembling fingers, I checked his text messages. There it was, a conversation spanning back 6 months, predating our relationship. My father. She likes intellectual types, art museums, indie films. Start there. Jake. First date went well. She's cautious but opened up about work. My father. Good. Take it slow. Need to know about her finances eventually. Jake. She mentioned a savings account today. Very careful with money. The exchanges continued, documenting every milestone in our relationship, every piece of personal information I had shared, all reported back to my father like intelligence from a spy. When Jake emerged from the bathroom, I was sitting on the couch with his phone in my hand and tears streaming down my face. You're working with my father, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His expression shifted from surprise to calculation to remorse so quickly, I almost missed the transitions. Miranda, I can explain. Explain what? That our entire relationship is a lie? That you've been gathering intelligence on me for months? It didn't start that way, he insisted. Your father reached out, yes. He said he was worried about you, that you had financial problems and weren't accepting help. And you believed him? A complete stranger? He was very convincing. And he offered to pay off my student loans if I could help keep an eye on you. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't even feel anger yet, just a hollow emptiness spreading through my chest. Get out, I said quietly. Miranda, please. What I feel for you now is real. Get out! I screamed, throwing his phone at the wall, where it left a dent in the plaster. After Jake left, I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and felt more alone than I ever had in my life. Everyone I had trusted had betrayed me. Everyone I had loved had used me. In that moment of complete isolation, I reached a breaking point. The careful, responsible, always available Miranda, who had spent her life trying to earn her family's approval, no longer existed. In her place was someone new, someone with nothing left to lose. The week after discovering Jake's betrayal, I fell apart completely. I called in sick to work, unable to face the fluorescent lights, and forced small talk of the office. I barely ate, subsisting on crackers and occasional bowls of cereal when I remembered food was necessary. I stopped answering my phone, even for unknown numbers, afraid of what new betrayal might be waiting. My apartment remained half unpacked, boxes serving as impromptu furniture in the sparsely furnished space. I moved between the bed and the couch like a ghost, sleeping at odd hours and staring at the ceiling when sleep wouldn't come. On the 5th day of this existence, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize but with an area code from Seattle. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Miranda, it's Allison Hunt." The name took a moment to register. Allison from college. We had been roommates sophomore year before she transferred to a school on the West Coast. We had fallen out of touch except for occasional likes on social media. "Allison," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Hi." "Thank God," you answered. "I've been trying to reach you for days. Your social media is deactivated, and I got worried when mutual friends mentioned weird posts from your dad." The simple act of someone from my past, being concerned enough to track down my number, brought fresh tears to my eyes. "It's been a rough time," I managed to say. "Talk to me," she said, her voice warm with genuine concern. "What's happening?" So I told her all of it. The Thanksgiving video, the bank account theft, the identity fraud, Jake's betrayal. Once I started, the words poured out in a torrent I couldn't control. Allison listened without interrupting, making small sounds of shock and sympathy at appropriate moments. "Miranda," she said when I had finally exhausted myself, "this is textbook financial abuse. And it's criminal. The police said family cases are hard to prosecute. Regular police aren't always equipped to handle complex financial crimes," she said. "I have a friend who works with financial abuse victims through a nonprofit legal aid organization. She might be able to help. Can I connect you?" It was the first real offer of help I'd received since this nightmare began. "Yes, please." The next day, I spoke with Sarah Goldberg, a financial abuse advocate with a background in both social work and law. She listened to my story with professional interest, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timelines and documentation. "You've actually done many things right already," she said when I had finished. "Freezing your credit, filing reports, documenting the fraud. But there are additional steps we should take." Over the next week, with Sarah's guidance, I began assembling a comprehensive paper trail. I collected bank statements, credit reports, police reports, and the fraudulent loan documents my father had created. Sarah connected me with a credit repair specialist who began the painstaking process of disputing each fraudulent account. I also began working with a financial counselor who helped me create an emergency budget to weather the storm until my credit could be restored. It meant cutting every non-essential expense, taking on freelance financial analysis work on evenings and weekends, and carefully tracking every dollar. The work was exhausting, but purposeful. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt a sense of forward movement rather than just freefall. Sarah also recommended a support group for victims of family financial abuse. At first, I resisted the idea, uncomfortable with sharing my story with strangers. But after a particularly difficult day when a collection agency called my workplace, I reluctantly agreed to attend. The group met in a community center downtown, a circle of 10 chairs, occupied by people who looked remarkably normal. I'm not sure what I had expected, perhaps visibly broken individuals, but these were ordinary-looking people of various ages and backgrounds. As they began sharing their stories, I was struck by the similarities in our experiences. Lisa's mother had maxed out credit cards in her name when she was still in college. James's brother had stolen his identity to finance a gambling addiction. Renee's parents had manipulated her into signing over her inheritance from her grandparents. When it was my turn, the words came more easily than I expected. These people understood in a way that even well-meaning friends could not. They nodded in recognition at the gaslighting tactics, the manipulation, the crushing self-doubt that accompanied such betrayal. The hardest part, I admitted, is that I still catch myself wondering if I'm overreacting. If maybe they're right and I'm being selfish about money. Heads nodded around the circle. That's how they keep control, said Roberto, an older man whose son had drained his retirement accounts. They make you question your own reality, your own right to protect yourself. You are not overreacting, Lisa assured me. What they did was criminal. End of story. For the first time, I felt truly understood. These strangers gave me permission to be angry, to protect myself, to fight back all the things my family had conditioned me to see as selfish or unreasonable. With this new support system in place, I began to rebuild. I returned to work full-time, explaining to Patricia that I was dealing with identity theft and working with professionals to resolve it. She seemed impressed by my organized approach and promised to keep me in mind for future leadership opportunities. I also implemented extreme privacy measures in all areas of my life. I changed my phone number and kept it unlisted. I rented a P.O. box for all mail. I used a VPN for all internet activities. I set up alerts for any activity on my credit report. I even changed my routine, taking different routes to work and varying my shopping patterns. This hypervigilance was exhausting, but necessary. I had learned the hard way that my family's reach was extensive and their tactics unscrupulous. 3 weeks after joining the support group, I received a troubling email from Sarah. Miranda, something concerning has come up. There's a website that appears to be focused on discrediting you. I think you should see it, but prepare yourself, it's disturbing. The link led to a professionally designed website titled The Truth About Miranda Walker. It contained carefully selected and often altered photos of me, fabricated emails and text exchanges, and lengthy narratives about my supposed financial instability and manipulation of my loving family. There were testimonials from anonymous sources claiming I had borrowed money and refused to repay it. There was a section dedicated to my history of mental health issues, complete with manufactured evidence of treatments I had never undergone for conditions I didn't have. Most disturbingly, there were private photos I had no idea existed, me sleeping on my couch, me checking my bank account on my laptop, even me entering my therapist's office. They had been stalking me, documenting my movements, invading my most private moments. At the bottom of the page was a contact form encouraging anyone with additional information about Miranda's financial schemes to submit details anonymously. It was a calculated attempt to destroy my reputation, my credit, and my credibility, all at once. The message was clear: fight back, and we will annihilate you. I called Sarah immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I've already taken screenshots of everything and submitted a report, she assured me. But Miranda, this crosses several legal lines. This isn't just financial abuse anymore. It's harassment, stalking, and defamation. What do? I asked, feeling smaller and more vulnerable than ever. This is beyond what I can handle alone, Sarah admitted. You need legal representation, someone who specializes in cases like this. I can't afford a lawyer, I said. The irony not lost on me: my family had stolen so much from me that I couldn't afford to fight back against their theft. Let me make some calls, Sarah said. There are attorneys who take these cases on contingency when there's clear evidence of criminal activity. Don't give up, Miranda. This website isn't a sign that you're losing, it's a sign that they're scared of you fighting back. That night, in my sparse apartment, surrounded by evidence of how thoroughly my life had been dismantled, I reached the absolute bottom. I sat on my bathroom floor, sobbing until no more tears would come, feeling utterly defeated. And then, in that moment of complete despair, something unexpected happened. The crushing weight of fear and helplessness began to transform into something else: pure, clarifying anger. Not the destructive kind that burns everything in its path, but the focused kind that forges steel. They had taken my money, my home, my relationship, And now they were trying to take my future. But there was one thing they couldn't take unless I gave it to them, my will to fight back. I got up from the floor, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was exhausted and battered, yes, but also more determined than I had ever seen her. Enough, I said to my reflection. No more. I had hit rock bottom. The only way left was up. The morning after discovering the website, I received a call from Sarah. Miranda, I think I've found someone who can help you. Her name is Diane Lancaster, and she specializes in complex financial crimes and family identity theft cases. 2 hours later, I was sitting in an imposing downtown office with a view of Boston Harbor, explaining my situation to Diane Lancaster. A sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s, with the focused intensity of someone who enjoyed intellectual challenges. Unlike the police officer who had taken my report, Diane seemed energized by the details of my case, occasionally nodding or making quick notes as I spoke. The website is actually good news, she said when I had finished. Good news? I repeated, bewildered. It's evidence of ongoing harassment, defamation, and stalking, all prosecutable offenses. More importantly, it shows they're scared. People don't escalate to this level unless they feel genuinely threatened. But I haven't done anything except try to protect myself. Exactly, Diane said, leaning forward. You're not playing by their rules anymore, and that terrifies them. Family abusers rely on victims remaining silent and compliant. So what can we actually do? A lot, she said, with the first smile I'd seen from her. First, I'm taking your case on contingency. If we win, and I believe we will, my fees come from the settlement. If we lose, you owe me nothing. The relief of not having to somehow find money for legal representation was overwhelming. Second, she continued, we're filing for restraining orders against all family members immediately. The website and stalking photos give us ample grounds. Will that actually stop them? It gives us legal leverage if they continue. But more importantly, it creates an official record of their behavior. Diane outlined a comprehensive strategy that included civil suits for the identity theft, defamation, and harassment, as well as working with law enforcement to pursue criminal charges where applicable. This won't be quick or easy, she cautioned. These cases typically take months, sometimes years. Are you prepared for that? I thought about all I had already endured, all that had been taken from me. Yes, I want my life back, and I want them to face consequences. Good, Diane said with an approving nod. Now, I need you to tell me absolutely everything, from the beginning, every detail, no matter how small or seemingly unimportant. Over the next several hours, I walked Diane through the entire history of my relationship with my family, from my mother's death when I was 16, through the recent discovery of Jake's betrayal. Diane asked probing questions, often circling back to clarify timelines or connections I hadn't noticed. Your father's pattern of behavior suggests this isn't his first time doing this, she observed. The sophistication of the fraud, the coordinated family response, the escalation tactics, these are not the actions of a first-time offender. The comment triggered a memory I had almost forgotten. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She stopped speaking to my father years ago. I was told it was because she was jealous of their marriage, but now I wonder. Diane's eyes sharpened. Do you have contact information for Carol? Not current. We lost touch after my mother died. Finding her should be our priority. If your father has a history of this behavior, it strengthens our case considerably. With Diane's resources, locating Aunt Carol took less than 48 hours. She was living in Arizona, having moved there shortly after cutting ties with my father 14 years earlier. When I called her, there was a long silence after I introduced myself. Miranda, she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. I've thought about you so many times over the years. I tried to stay in touch after your mother died, but your father... I know, I said, though I was only beginning to understand the extent of my father's manipulations. Aunt Carol, I need to ask you something important. Why did you really stop speaking to my father? The story she told confirmed Diane's suspicions, and broke my heart all over again. My father had systematically drained my mother's inheritance after her death money that had been meant for all four of us children. When Aunt Carol had confronted him, he had turned the family against her, painting her as greedy and unstable. He took everything, she said, anger still evident in her voice after all these years. And when I tried to fight him legally, he made sure no one would believe me. "Would you be willing to provide a statement about what happened?" I asked. "I'm building a legal case against him for similar financial crimes." "Would I ever?" she replied without hesitation. "I've been waiting 14 years for someone to finally see him for what he is." Aunt Carol's testimony provided crucial context for my father's pattern of financial abuse. But she wasn't the only one. As Diane's investigation progressed, we discovered my father had victimized several others, including my maternal grandmother during the last years of her life. Bank records showed he had systematically emptied her accounts while serving as her caregiver, using tactics disturbingly similar to those he had employed against me. By the time she passed away, her substantial retirement savings had dwindled to almost nothing. "Your father isn't just an opportunistic fraudster," Diane explained as we reviewed the mounting evidence. "He's what we call a financial predator, someone who deliberately targets and exploits vulnerable individuals, often family members. The scope of his crimes was staggering. Over 2 decades, he had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from at least 6 different people, always using the same playbook: gain access, isolate the victim, gradually drain their resources, then discredit them if they fought back. My siblings had been both victims and accomplices, manipulated by our father, but ultimately making their own choices to participate in the exploitation. Each had played a specific role in the scheme: Amanda as the distraction, Trent as the false ally, Paige as the supposed innocent. As our case built, word began to spread. 2 journalists from a local newspaper reached out, interested in covering what they described as a pattern of elder financial abuse and identity theft spanning decades. With Diane's careful guidance, I agreed to an interview, hoping that public awareness might help protect others from similar predators. The article, when it was published, was thorough and damning. Titled, "Family Predator: A 2-decade Trail of Financial Abuse," it detailed my father's methods and the systems that had failed to protect his victims. It included statements from financial abuse experts, testimonials from other victims, and an explanation of the warning signs others should watch for. The day after the article appeared, I received a call from Diane. "The district attorney's office just contacted me," she said, an unusual excitement in her typically measured voice. "They want to meet about pursuing criminal charges against your father, not just for the identity theft against you, but for the systematic elder abuse of your grandmother." "They're actually taking it seriously?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "The newspaper article created pressure, and the evidence we've assembled is compelling. Miranda, this is a significant development. Criminal charges carry much heavier penalties than civil suits." 3 days later, we sat in a conference room with 2 assistant district attorneys, meticulously walking them through the evidence we had gathered. They asked pointed questions, took copious notes, and exchanged meaningful glances as particularly damning details emerged. "We believe there's sufficient evidence to pursue multiple felony charges," the lead prosecutor finally said. "Financial elder abuse, identity theft, wire fraud, and potentially others as we continue investigating." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a sense of vindication. The system that had initially seemed so indifferent to my plight was finally responding. My father would face real consequences for his actions, not just against me, but against all those he had harmed over the years. As I left the district attorney's office that day, I stood taller than I had in months. The road ahead would still be long and difficult, but I was no longer walking it alone or in the dark. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Trent. "We need to talk, not about the legal stuff, about the truth." After consulting with Diane, I agreed to meet him in a public park, with a legal assistant from Diane's office positioned nearby to witness the interaction. When I arrived, Trent looked diminished somehow, the cocky younger brother replaced by a haunted man who couldn't meet my eyes. "I can't do this anymore," he said without preamble. "The lies, the manipulation, all of it. I'm done." "Why now?" I asked, wary of another trap. "The article," he said simply. "Seeing it all laid out like that, I couldn't pretend anymore. What we did to you, what Dad did to Grandma and Aunt Carol, it's indefensible. Yet you defended it, participated in it." He nodded, accepting the accusation. "I did. For years I told myself it was just family helping family, that you could afford it, that you owed us somehow. But that was just his voice in my head, not reality." "What do you want, Trent?" "To make a statement. Tell investigators what I know. Everything I know." He looked up, finally meeting my eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Miranda. I don't deserve that. But I need to do something right for once." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. All I saw was exhaustion and remorse. "Talk to my attorney," I said, handing him Diane's card. "If you're serious about coming clean, she'll help you do it properly." Trent's testimony proved to be the tipping point. With his insider account of how my father had orchestrated the financial abuse, coordinated the family's response, and planned the retaliatory measures, the district attorney's office accelerated their investigation. Within weeks, they issued an arrest warrant for my father on 14 separate charges, including identity theft, wire fraud, financial elder abuse, stalking, and conspiracy. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from journalists seeking comments, distant relatives expressing shock or support, and even a producer from a national news program interested in featuring my story as part of a series on family financial abuse. Through it all, I maintained the careful boundaries I had established with Diane's help. I referred all media inquiries to her office, kept my new address confidential, and continued to focus on rebuilding my financial and emotional health. As Diane had predicted, the road would be long. But for the first time since that Thanksgiving day when my father had posted that humiliating video, I could see a clear path forward, not just to recovery, but to a kind of justice I had once thought impossible. 10 months after that fateful Thanksgiving, I stood in a courtroom watching as my father was led away in handcuffs. The judge had denied bail, citing the extraordinary measures my father had taken to intimidate witnesses and obstruct justice. The criminal trial had been grueling. My father had hired an expensive defense attorney who attempted to paint me as unstable and financially irresponsible. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, credit applications, the defamatory website, stalking photos, forged documents, and testimony from multiple victims, including Trent and Aunt Carol, had created an insurmountable case against him. The sentencing was equally decisive. 8 years in state prison for the various financial crimes, with additional consecutive sentences for the harassment and stalking charges. The judge had been particularly harsh in her assessment, calling my father a calculating predator who exploited the trust of family members for personal gain. Amanda and Paige had received lesser sentences, 3 years probation each, mandatory financial counseling, and restitution orders requiring them to repay every dollar they had taken from me. Both had eventually followed Trent's example and cooperated with prosecutors, though their statements had been more self-serving and less forthcoming than his. The civil case had concluded 2 months earlier with a judgment in my favor for nearly $300,000, the combined total of the stolen funds, fraudulent debts, legal fees, and punitive damages. The court had also issued permanent restraining orders against all 3 siblings and my father, legally barring them from any contact with me. As I left the courthouse that day, Diane walked beside me, her expression satisfied but solemn. "How does it feel?" she asked as we descended the stone steps. "Surreal," I admitted. "Part of me still can't believe this is finally over." "The legal proceedings are over," she corrected gently. "The healing is just beginning." She was right, of course. The external battle had been won, but the internal one, rebuilding my sense of security, learning to trust again, processing the grief of losing my entire family, that work was ongoing. The financial recovery had been more straightforward. With the court judgments in hand, the credit bureaus had removed all fraudulent accounts from my record. My credit score had gradually rebounded, though it would take another year to fully recover. The restitution payments were trickling in, and while I would likely never see the full amount my family had stolen, I had enough to rebuild a solid financial foundation. 3 weeks after the criminal sentencing, I moved into a new apartment in a secure building with video surveillance and restricted access, small but bright, with large windows that filled the space with natural light. It was the first place that had truly felt safe since the ordeal began. My professional life had taken an unexpected turn as well. After the case received public attention, I was approached by a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing financial abuse. They were looking for someone with both financial expertise and personal experience to help develop educational programs for vulnerable populations. After much consideration, I'd accepted a position as their financial education director. The role meant a slight pay cut from my corporate job, but the work was deeply meaningful. 3 days a week, I developed curriculum and training materials. The other 2, I conducted workshops for seniors, domestic violence survivors, and young adults aging out of foster care, all groups at high risk for financial exploitation. The first time I stood before a room of elderly participants and shared my story, I had been terrified. But their response, the nods of recognition, the questions that revealed their own vulnerabilities, the gratitude for specific protection strategies, had convinced me this was where I needed to be. "You're making something good come from something terrible," Dr. Cooper had observed during one of our ongoing therapy sessions. "That's not just resilience, it's transformation." My personal life had been slower to rebuild. After Jake's betrayal, I had been hesitant to pursue new relationships. But gradually, I had formed connections through my support group, my new workplace, and even a pottery class I had joined as a form of stress relief. These relationships were different, built on mutual respect rather than obligation, with clear boundaries that were honored rather than violated. I had learned to recognize the warning signs of manipulation and to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. 6 months after the criminal trial, I received a letter from Trent, forwarded through Diane's office as required by the restraining order. She had vetted it carefully, ensuring it contained no manipulation or threats before passing it on. "I'm in therapy now," he wrote, "trying to understand why I participated in hurting the one person who always tried to help me. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to become someone better than who I was, someone who wouldn't have done those things to you." I read the letter several times, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: anger, sadness, a faint nostalgia for the brother I had once thought I had. I chose not to respond, not out of spite, but out of self-protection. Perhaps someday I would be ready for that conversation, but not yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the trust too thoroughly broken. Aunt Carol had become a steady presence in my life, our connection rebuilt through weekly phone calls and occasional visits. She had moved to Boston shortly after the trial, wanting to be closer to her only niece. At 68, she was vivacious and creative, introducing me to her passion for local theater and community gardening. "You remind me so much of your mother," she told me one evening as we sat on my small balcony, watching the sunset over the city. "Not just in looks, but in spirit. She would be so proud of how you've handled all this." Those words had brought tears to my eyes, not the wounded tears I had shed so often over the past year, but healing ones. To be connected to my mother's memory in such a positive way was a gift I hadn't expected. On the anniversary of that Thanksgiving Day, I hosted a different kind of gathering. My apartment was filled with the people who had helped me reclaim my life: Diane, Sarah, from the legal aid organization Dr. Cooper, friends from my support group, colleagues from the nonprofit, Aunt Carol, and a few new friends who had entered my life during the rebuilding process. As I looked around at these people sharing food and conversation in my home, I realized I had created something my biological family had never given me, a community based on genuine care and respect. Later that evening, after my guests had departed, I sat alone on my couch, reflecting on the journey of the past year. I had lost so much: family relationships, financial security, my home, my sense of safety and trust. But I had also gained things I might never have found otherwise: a purpose that aligned with my values, relationships built on authentic connection, and most importantly, an unshakable knowledge of my own strength. The financial analyst I had once been would have calculated this as a net loss. The woman I had become recognized it as a painful but necessary transformation. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Saw the news? Your story inspired the state legislature to introduce a new bill specifically addressing family financial abuse. They're calling it the Walker Protection Act. Your suffering is changing laws, Miranda. That's extraordinary. I smiled at the message, feeling a surge of quiet pride. The painful journey hadn't just been about reclaiming my own life, it was creating ripples that might protect countless others from similar exploitation. The next morning, I stood at my kitchen window, watching the city wake up as I sipped my coffee. There would still be difficult days ahead, court appeals to navigate, moments of grief for the family I had lost, the ongoing work of rebuilding trust in myself and others. But I was no longer the woman who had arranged silverware while being secretly filmed and mocked. I was no longer the daughter desperately seeking approval from those who saw me only as a resource to exploit. I was no longer a victim. I was Miranda Walker, survivor, advocate, and the architect of my own life. And that life, rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, was becoming something beautiful in its own right. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a betrayal? How did you find the strength to start over? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes our greatest strength emerges from our deepest wounds.